This is part 2 of the build log for my serial number 300 Deviant discus launch glider. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, watch that first. We're picking up where we left off and we'll complete the build. Let's mask the fuselage and mark where the aileron pushrods will come out. I make a small cut on the tape so that it can conform to the shape of the fuselage, and since the tape is floating, my knife doesn't nick the surface. And once we're done with the first side, we just flip the fuselage around and do the second side. I like to mark the edges of the pushrod flaring so it's easier to measure where to cut the slots. Next, measure out 5.5 millimeters and mark that both in the front and back positions. Once that is done, just draw a straight line between the two locations. That is the center line of the slot you'll cut for the pushrods. I start the slot with a pointy diamond burr bit. The pointy tip helps penetrate the surface and keeps the cut very accurate. Once the initial slot is cut, I start to widen it. After removing the tape, I change to a 2.35mm bit to cut the final slot. I think this slot is great at 2 to 2.5mm wide, so try not to go wider than that. I then use a fine round file to clean up the edges and make it perfect. I double check to make sure that the center line is 5.5 millimeters from the wing saddle. I spray everything down with rubbing alcohol and wipe the fuselage clean. I change it back to the pointy burr bit and we're going to start working on the slot for the elevator control horn. Start the slot 3mm from where the elevator sits and run the slot all the way down to the edge between the mount and fuselage. I then slightly widen it so that the control horn can easily fit through. Using a file, I clean up all the edges to make sure it's perfect as well. I then double check to make sure it's around 3mm. As usual, I give it a good spray and wipe everything clean. Next, I change over to a ball end. I'm going to use this to rough up the inside of the nose where the servo tray will be glued in. Rough up both sides, but remember, don't put too much pressure or you'll grind through the structure. That was easy. Now let's just clean everything up. Put the servos onto the tray. I have the output shaft of the rear aileron servos facing forward, so it's easier to access the pushrods and it gives you more space for the ballast to be inserted. If the tray is tight, just give it a few swipes of your file. I forgot the tabs of the front servos actually goes underneath the rear servo, so Let's just pop this out and get the elevator servo into the tray first. Let's pick out two of the regular cross-shaped control horns. These are going to be used for the ailerons. And let's get all the small screws to hold down the servos. Now let's screw the servos onto the servo tray. Next, rough up the edges of the servo tray where it's going to be glued into the fuselage. You know the drill by now. Spray it down with rubbing alcohol and wipe it clean. Once that's done, insert the servo tray and the servos into the fuselage. I use the Spectrum AR410, which is a little bit longer, so I have the front of my servo tray 62mm away from the nose. If you're using a smaller or shorter receiver, you can reduce that length. Next, I push down on the servo tray and make sure that everything is against the bottom and it's level. Using our CA needles, I precisely apply thin CA along the edges of the servo tray and let it soak into the joint. I hit it with a bit of CA kicker, and then I hold the walls of the nose tight against the servo tray as it cures. Then I apply more CA along the edges to build up a fillet and have a nice strong connection. Let's remove the screws and start installing the linkages. I'll install the elevator first, so let's hook up the elevator servo to the servo tester and make sure it's running properly. Center the servo. On this build, I'm going to be using the armsword pulleys for the tail. The pulleys help give your pull string installations lots of deflection and improve centering and torque. The pulleys come in packs of 10. International customers can buy them on armsword.com, and if you're in Canada or the US, you can buy them on armswordusa.com. We installed the elevator in the first video. The glue is cured, but there's a little bit of excess. Just cut the excess off with a knife. Remove the coil of wire and carefully unfurl it. Be careful not to bend or crease the wire. You won't be able to get that out afterwards. Take one end of the wire and feed it down the fuselage through the elevator slot. After you pull the wire through the nose, tape it down so it doesn't wander away. To create the loop for the elevator, first insert the wire through one of the crimps. Notice I'm leaving a lot of wire at the end. Pass the wire through the crimp again to form the loop, and then pass it through a third time. This gives it a nice pigtail to fish the loop out of the fuselage when it falls inside. I use a pair of needle nose pliers to crimp the tube down hard. This should already hold the wire securely, but for added peace of mind, I put a drop of CA on either end of the crimp. I hit it with kicker to make sure all the CA is cured before I pull the wire back into the fuselage, otherwise it might get stuck inside. Attach the loop to the elevator control horn. Pull the wire tight so the loop doesn't pop off the control horn. Screw the stabilizer to the fuselage. I'm using aftermarket aluminum screws. Double check to make sure the control horn is moving freely inside the slot. Next, we're going to attach the wire to the pulley. I take one of the white plastic guide tubes and cut the two ends so that it's nicer, then I thread the wire through the tube. I give the end of the wire a slight bend. This is going to make it easier to thread into the pulley. Insert the wire into the hole on the side of the pulley and pull it through the top. Pull the wire tight, making sure that it's seated into the groove on the pulley. After pulling the wire tight, tape it down to the fuselage. Now we're going to slide the guide tube back forward and we're going to glue that to the side of the fuselage. I hold the tube to the fuselage with needle nose pliers and add a few drops of CA. Hit it with kicker and that's it. Put the servo screw back on, but don't tighten it all the way. Get a good grip of the wire, and then we're going to move the servo position to its maximum up deflection. We want the elevator to touch the boom after the install. For now, give it some slack so it's somewhere between center and max. Keeping tension in the wire, loop it around the servo screw twice in the clockwise direction. Remember, the elevator shouldn't be touching the boom yet. Keeping tension in the wire, start to tighten the servo screw. This holds the wire in place. As you tighten the screw, the wire will pull slightly and your elevator should now be touching the boom. Return the servo to center and then test to make sure that it's running smoothly. This is the full range of your elevator. Max up elevator touches the boom And there's tons of down deflection for the pushover at the top of the launch. Next, I cut the wire. Then I use some medium CA to further secure the screw and wire. Next, we're going to install the aileron pushrods. I deburr the ends of the pushrods with a file. Once that is done, I clean everything with rubbing alcohol and wipe clean. I bend one end of each pushrod to 90 degrees. I make sure that the carbon tube is 22 millimeters from the bend, and then I glue it all together with thin CA. Just repeat this for the other pushrod as well. Set the pushrods aside. Next, we're going to plug in both of the Aileron servos to the servo tester and just make sure they're running properly. Remember those cross servo arms we set aside earlier? Put one of them onto the servo. Now this side isn't quite 90 degrees, so flip the arm over and it should fit nicely now. Next, I mark the arms that I don't want. These are going to be cut off later. I repeat this process for the other servo. Cut off the unwanted arms. We're going to be using the innermost hole, so shorten this arm as well. Then I use a knife to trim it down nicely. Once that's done, attach it to your servo. And let's repeat it on the other side. Once you're finished cutting the servo arm, attach it to the servo as well. Next, let's attach the servo screws. Test to make sure the servos are moving freely and that there's no interference against the servo arms. Grab one of those push rods and we're going to slide it back into the fuselage. Repeat it for the other push rod as well. Attach the push rods to the wing control horns. This might be harder than usual since this is the first time the push rods goes through those holes and the other end of the push rod isn't connected to the servos yet. Flip the wing over and let's attach the screws. Flip it back over and lay it top down. This is my spacer to block off 13 mm of max up deflection. Use the block to offset one of the ailerons. Secure it with tape. The right aileron is controlled by the right servo. Use the servo tester to set the servo to its maximum up position. Carefully mark where the hole is on the pushrod. This is where you're going to bend the pushrod. Remove the spacer and repeat this process on the other side. Once we're done, let's flip the plane back over and remove the wing from the fuselage. Pull one of the push rods out. Grab a set of pliers and line the edge against the line we drew earlier. Bend the wire and make sure it's 90 degrees to the other bend. For this bend, you're going to bend it past the 90 degrees. Then let's shorten that leg. Slip it back into the fuselage and then let's hook it up onto the servo. Repeat on the other side. As I said earlier, these two legs should be 90 degrees to each other. Now that the pushrod is done, let's slide it back into the fuselage and hook this one up to the servo as well. We're going to add a few drops of CA to the ends of the pushrod. This prevents the wire from coming off the servo arms. Hit it with kicker. That's it, we're finished aileron linkages too. Now let's attach the fuselage back onto the wing. I'm just going to attach the aileron servos to the servo tester again to make sure that the linkages are working the way they're supposed to. So this is how the ailerons are offset at servo neutral. There's all the up deflection we need, and we have lots of stopping power if needed. Now on to the very last step of the build, attaching the fin. I normally just tape my fins onto the boom, but for this one I'm going to do a semi-permanent install. I'm not going to rough up the boom for adhesion. It might be hard to see in the video, but one side of the fin has a bigger curvature and one side is more flat. Now the curvier side, that is the lifting side, and that's going to go toward the direction of your launch blade. So since I'm right-handed and the blade is on the left wingtip, the curvier surface will be on the left side. Because of the oval shape, the fin is pretty much self-aligning against the boom. As you can see, the leading edge of the fin should sit right on the seam of the fuselage. Make sure the fin is perpendicular to the stabilizer and to the wing. I apply some thin CA to the joint. Since the fin is on the boom so tightly, thin CA isn't going to wick between the two surfaces. This will hold the fin in place, but if I ever needed to take the fin off, I should be able to do it without damaging the fin or the fuselage. And that's it, we're finished the build. Thanks for tuning in for my build. If you enjoyed it, please remember to give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe so you don't miss our next videos. See you next time.